The Intertech Group and the Zucker family are proud to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment.
Welcome to We the Women. This is our celebration of the 19th Amendment. Exactly 100 years ago, on August 18th, 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving women the right to vote. To celebrate, we'll be talking to women from around South Carolina, thought leaders, movers and shakers. We'll ask them about how they have used their voice and what they have done to contribute to our great democracy. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm really glad that you could be part of this.
Just delighted to have been invited, so thank you.
I just wanted to start by asking how you're doing right now, and also just your role with the International African American Museum. We're still pretty far from the point of opening, but of course, still working hard in that process. So, what has this time been like for you and for the museum team?
Yeah, it's been different because in my role as the Director of Education and Engagement for faith-based communities, I'm traveling, I'm going to meetings, I'm meeting people, attending their events just to do some fundraising and making connections and doing presentations and things of that nature. So it's been a little different to come to a sudden halt where none of that is happening. And so now having to think very creatively, how does that work virtually? How do we use these virtual platforms to still kind of do the same thing, maybe in a little different way, but still very meaningful. So it's been a lot of trying to reach out to faith communities. And the hardest part of that has been because in the beginning of the pandemic, the churches had a big change too. It's just churches, but faith communities and houses of worship, they've had to go virtual as well. So they haven't been focused on a whole lot of outreach. They've been focused on maintaining their houses of worship and making sure things are functioning and flowing well. So it's been a little difficult trying to connect, but things have sort of balanced out a little bit. And so these faith communities have kind of figured out how this works and how we're going to go about doing things, how we still do our tithes and offerings. So they've been more receptive to taking meetings via Zoom and all the virtual platforms. So we're getting there. And then planning virtual programs so that we don't have to eliminate those. So we've been just, powwowing, thinking out loud and trying to figure out how do we do this in this unique way.
But what has it been like for you personally? I mean, like you said, with this role, you're used to traveling and meeting people, but also I would just think more so in your life in general, in your faith life, used to being around people. What has it been like for you?
It's been hard because I am a people person. I like touching and connecting and talking and meeting. And so, there's a term called compassion fatigue where, people who've been doing the work and they get really exhausted and tired. So I've been saying kind of compassion neglect. I feel like I've been neglecting or because I don't have the opportunity to go out. I have a 91-year-old dad that I care for. So I have to be really mindful of places that I go and, how much I do that. And so I feel like I'm being neglected in some way of not being able to touch and be with people because, people have food drives and, all kinds of things to help the community. And I haven't been able to participate in those. So I've had to rethink, like, how can I continue to feel like I'm doing meaningful work without literally being in those places? So I make sure that I email and share the flyers and let people know that what's going on in the community. And so I feel like I'm being helpful in that way, but it's been really, really hard. And we've had a fire. We had a family fire in the midst of all this. So just with COVID, the fire, reconstruction, it's been a lot to contend with.
I did want to ask you too about a really exciting piece of good news for you and for the the International African American Museum, and I was there for the topping out ceremony, which celebrates a big construction milestone. And I was
Yes.
talking about this earlier. It just felt like such a big step in that there is a building, and
There
it
is a building.
feels more real. So
Yes.
what was that day like for you, seeing that last beam go up?
Listen, it was so spiritual for me. One, it's been 20 years. This project, this thought of, this image of started in the year 2000. So here we are 20 years later, and I often think about the people who have been a part of this project from the ground floor, from day one, like as they were imagining and trying to create drafts and picture this place, that how meaningful this is for them, because what once was a dream is now a reality. And for me, who have been a part of this project for 2 years in terms of working there, but have been familiar with it for years, it's like it's a dream come true. And even in the 2 years that we've been talking about it, we've stood on the soil, we blessed the soil, and, we walked around, and now there's a frame building that's there. So it was just honorable. My 91-year-old dad was able to sign his name. And just so watching the other folks just come in and sign their names and their loved ones' names, I just thought it was just magical, very spiritual. And I just feel like the ancestors are really happy that we have come to this place.
How did you come to this role with the museum? Like you said, it's been a couple years now. How did you end up connecting with the museum?
Yeah, so I had always heard about it. I didn't live in Charleston. I was gone for 24 years, and I came back in 2016. And looking for work here in Charleston was a little hard, to try to find that right place. And then a friend of mine shared with me that there was a faith-based position that had come open. I was like, really? At the museum? So when I read the job description, I was like, oh my God, this is me. This is who I am. I love, bringing people together and talking about history and connecting people to their history. So a friend of mine shared it with me, and it just spoke to me as I read it. And 2 years later, I'm here. Yeah.
You said you had been away from Charleston for a while, but you grew up.
I grew up here, yes.
What was your childhood like in Charleston? Where exactly in the area did you grow up?
So my dad retired military, and he and my mother are both from Johns Island. So even though we lived West Ashley, I spent all of my days on Johns Island. My church was on Johns Island, and we were very active people in our church. So from youth groups to Sunday school to activities, all of my time was spent there. And because both my mom and dad's families from Johns Island, grandmothers, aunts, cousins, uncles, we spent time there. So I do a talk talking about growing up a Gullah girl. And I just share my roots of River Road, Johns Island, and what it was like to grow up with Gullah Geechee parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, the kinds of things we've done, and what's customary for us and culturally customary for us, and the foods we ate and why we did certain things. So it was truly a blessing to grow up here. I love Charleston. I love Johns Island and all of the surrounding islands. And it was meaningful. It was always words of wisdom being taught and shared with you. I mean, you could just be outside running around with the kids, and there's always going to be some elder that's going to share something with you that will carry you through the rest of your life. So it was great. It was great. I had a very close-knit family, and we did everything together. So my first cousins on my dad's side are like my siblings, because we were just I mean, cousins just doesn't seem close enough for the time that we spent with one another.
I wanted to ask you about your grandparents, too. Grandparents who are well known here in the Charleston area, of course. Esau Jenkins is your grandfather.
Grandfather
Um,
and his wife, Janie
Yes.
Jenkins.
so that's actually what one of the things I wanted to ask you
Yes.
is I think we hear a lot about Esau Jenkins and what he did for the civil rights movement, but also they were very much a team,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so I want to hear about your grandmother. We're talking
Yes.
about women
Yes.
here, and just about her. You know, what do you
Yes.
want people to know about her and what she in particular did and contributed?
Absolutely. I think it's something in general that we all should always think about, even when we see the men who have participated and led marches and just whatever they're doing to create better environments for the community, that there are women that are walking alongside of them. They may not have the public eye, but they couldn't do what they're doing without the women there. And my grandfather was no different. My grandmother was the accountant, the business owner. She was the community organizer. She did everything. And she was able to afford herself to raise the kids and make sure the money was in the account and had the savings and determine what went where. She managed all of that. And our family, we have been real intentional about making sure we include her when we talk about my grandfather, because he could not have done all that he did without her. And so she always made sure, okay, this is how much money we have. This is what we can buy. This is what you can do. You can go here, and this is your travel money. Like, she made sure all of that was in place. We had family businesses. She managed all of the accounting. She made sure the ordering of all the food, whatever the business was, she managed that. So Janie Bell Jenkins' name has to be called alongside of my grandfather, Esau Jenkins. So we say Janie Bell Jenkins or Janie Bell and Esau Jenkins. We include their names together. And I think that's the case for a lot of women. They don't get that recognition. And put on pedestals. They're unsung heroes. And I don't really like to say unsung, because they are singing. The work that they do, they are making noise and they are doing incredible things. So, she was the rock. I mean, she maintained it all. My cousins and I was just talking. We had our family Zoom meeting on Saturday, and we were saying how of all the grandkids and her maintaining the businesses, like, she never seemed frustrated. She never seemed like we were aggravating her or we were getting on her nerves. She just always had this calm and this peace about her and this willing to support and to help and to gather. And when I thought about it, I was like, I've never seen her raise her voice. So she was a strong woman. And she died at 86, and my grandfather died in 1972. And so she, continued on with the family businesses and, was a part of all of her grandchildren's lives and great-grandchildren's lives. So she's remarkable. She is remarkable. I can just see her strength in the kitchen. I can see her strength in the yard. I can see her strength when we're all gathering and going someplace together. And I'm very much encouraged. She's one of my mentors because I just don't know if I had not seen that model of this woman who was multitasking and managing all projects, the project coordinator for just about everything. I don't know if I hadn't seen that, I don't know if I could have be who I am now.
Right.
Because of her.
And there was a really special time. I'm trying to remember if it was a year ago or so, or it was sometime in the last year where your grandparents' bus was displayed on the National Mall and
Yes.
and wanted to ask you about that, what that was like to see them, and I do remember it was not just Esau Jenkins. It was Esau and
Jan-
Jenkins.
yes,
And like
yes,
you said, that's something your family has done intentionally. You know,
intentionally.
her out of it.
No.
What was that experience like seeing that in such a prominent
Oh my
spot?
gosh. The wonderful thing was I was in DC for the I am for the museum, which happened to be at the same time that the bus was on display at the National Mall. So it was just beautiful that I could incorporate the work that I'm doing with the museum in terms of African American history, untold stories. And here is one, you know, in my own family, my grandparents' bus. And it was just amazing to see all these people come by and ask questions. And we were there, myself and my cousins were there to answer questions. And people were just amazed of the stories of the wonderful things they had done with the bus in terms of transporting people and talking about voting
I guess just to
rights.
explain, right? They gave people free transportation on the bus. Right?
Yes. So part of that was, you know, they lived on Johns Island, and people who worked in the city of Charleston, that was their only means of transportation. And so while on that bus ride, you know, they were being taught the parts of the Constitution and helping to memorize it and have an understanding, not even just memorizing, but understanding what it meant to be a voter. So that they could become voters. And so on that bus ride, there was conversation about that. There was teaching them that part of the Constitution, and while they were going to work and while they were coming back from work. But it was almost like a community meeting for all those riding that bus. There was different conversations about different things that were going on in the world and kind of what you needed to do. So that bus, if that bus could speak, I'm telling you, it would share so many amazing things or amazing conversations that took place in that bus. So that panel of the bus is in the National African American Museum of History and Culture, and then the entire bus, which was helped to be restored by the Volkswagen Historical Society, and they're the ones that have been displaying it in various places.
That feels so relevant still, even today in Charleston. The question of transportation to work and voting rights, right? I mean,
Yes.
that was decades ago, but it feels
Still
those are still things we're talking
Yes,
about.
yes. I mean, I still have family members who live on the island who come to the head of their road and wait for people to come by to get a ride to downtown Charleston. That still exists to this very day. I mean, that's how they get to work. They rely on someone passing by, at least going their direction. And even if they don't get all the way downtown, they'll get to Maybank Highway. And then from Maybank Highway to Folly Road. And then from Folly Road to downtown, where they can take a bus to the next destination. So that still happens to this very day. So people are still relying on transportation and people to get them to their significant places.
I wanted to ask you about what you saw in the changes with Charleston itself, from when you lived here when you were growing up, and then weren't in Charleston for a while, and then coming back. Just what you saw that changed, what stayed the same.
Yes.
I guess what kind of jumped out to you initially when you first moved back here?
You know, growing up here, like I said, my family's from Johns Island, and we had some businesses in downtown Charleston, one on King Street, several on King Street and on Spring Street. So I was used to, you know, kind of hanging out on King and Spring Street, and what during my time, we considered King Street from Calhoun Street on back Black King Street or Black Charleston. And so when I came back home, you know, a lot of those businesses were gone. A lot of the places that we were used to kind of shopping or even hanging out in, they were no longer there. So that was a bit of a disappointment not to see a lot of the African American owned businesses on King Street, like as I had grown up with, and even on Spring Street. So that was very different. It's still very hard to travel that because I love King Street. I even love where it is now, but it's very hard not to see Black-owned businesses as a part of the new structure in the city. That's the most disappointing part.
Yeah, and I would think that's just an interesting dynamic. Now you're part of this museum and hoping to bring in visitors. And
Yes.
one of the big changes to Charleston, of course, is that focus on bringing in tourists, bringing in
Yeah.
visitors. But
Yes.
of course, it's very intentional that the museum is going to be on the
Sure.
peninsula.
Sure.
I guess what else do you want to see on the peninsula change in terms of what people visually see? Like you
Yeah.
said, it's difficult for you to not see
Right.
businesses being
Right.
on those prominent streets down.
Yeah. I get asked all the time for people who don't live here, take me to the Gullah Geechee community, or take me to the area where all the Gullah Geechee people are. And so having to explain it's not just a place or a destination, it is the culture, it is the people. So it's spread out. It's not like, oh, go over to this section and you'll see all these folks. So, and then the next question is, well, where are the African American owned businesses? And so even when I try to create a document for folks to, try this restaurant, go to this store, it's scattered. And so for them not to be from here and having to drive, downtown, North Charleston, Somerville, West Ashley, that's a lot. And people are looking for, kind of maybe to park someplace and kind of walk around and be able to, see these different African American owned businesses. So I am really hoping and praying that there's something that can be creating some type of village maybe where there's an opportunity for several African American business owners to be kind of contained in one place or near each other, walking distance. And so, there's lots of opportunity downtown. I mean, there's lots of businesses or buildings that have not been fully developed. So I'm just hoping that some real estate folks and the city and just the community at large are thinking about how to incorporate, even if there's small spaces, how Black-owned businesses can be a part of the peninsula and downtown Charleston.
What are some things about Charleston that either haven't changed at all or feel very familiar to what you experienced growing up?
Haven't changed at all. I think there's still some of the mindset that, when I grew up, we didn't go past Calhoun Street. Like you just knew that was off limits. So, but as an adult, when I did go past Calhoun Street, it seemed very strange and awkward. But of course, I felt like I belonged and I should be there. But I still think coming back home and reconnecting to friends and neighbors and community, that dividing line is still there. And some folks have, when I tell them about the African American Museum, some folks don't know where that is. They don't know where their aquarium is because they didn't go down there. And so I think trying to eliminate those dividing lines that are there so that people can feel like this is the city I live in and this is where I'm comfortable and I have a right to be on either side of the street. I think some of those things are still present. Just because they just have been. So I think when we can change our culture a little bit where we are seeing each other as equals and coming together and doing events and activities together, then those lines will begin to fade away. But I think coming back home, they were very recognizable that they were still in place.
I wanted to ask you about more of your career and earlier in your career. You studied, is it criminal justice in college? Is that right?
Yes, have a degree in criminal justice.
Yeah. What made you want to study that?
So when I was younger, I somehow or another I had an affinity for youth and juvenile offenders. And I think, I shouldn't say somehow, but I think because when I think of myself, how opportunities were there for me to go a different direction. And had it not been for the influences of teachers and community, of course, my family, but those persons kind of really sticking by me, keeping their eye on me, making sure that I did not cross over to the other side. I wanted to provide that for other people, for other kids like myself. And then when I got to college, that kind of got tweaked into social work. And so when I graduated, I started doing social work, working with juvenile offenders and then working with child protective services and battered women and children. So my ministry formed out of that, of caring for folks and helping people, providing resources. And so I did a lot of outreach, did a lot of public speaking, just talking about ways in which we should learn about particularly domestic violence and how it impacts the families and our children. So that just kind of went under ministry work. And so pastoral care and counseling is when I went to seminary, and that was my focus, to do pastoral care and counseling, because I felt like I was doing that anyway. And became a chaplain at Emory University Hospital and worked there for a number of years. And so, but part of my chaplaincy work was outreach as well. I was always working with the community, working with faith communities, just doing projects for the hospital and patients and staff. So this just seemed to fit where I'm at now to continue to do the same thing.
Yeah. At what point did you realize that you wanted to go to seminary? Did you know that for a while? I guess what was the role of faith in your life growing up? When did you realize that was your path?
Yeah, so, I grew up in church, 2-3 days a week for church, Sunday morning and Sunday school and youth events and activities. So, church was incorporated. Faith was definitely a part of who we were from the time that I can remember. So that was a natural piece. But what I did discover when I was working with battered women and children, that I was providing counseling to them and giving them tools to kind of think about how to stay out of these unhealthy relationships. And I realized, if there's nothing stronger than themselves to help them get out of these unhealthy relationships and stay, then they're not going to be able to do it. And I can remember just, I'm counseling with women and their kids and thinking about, who is the stronger power for them, and what are they going to hold on to give them the strength to do these things. And as I was thinking about that for them, I heard the calling for me to continue this work and to become better trained so that I could provide the right counseling for women and children. And so my calling to ministry came out of that. And that's why I focused on pastoral care and counseling when I went to seminary.
Did you grow up seeing many female leaders in the church?
So it's ironic because when I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, I got involved with a very, very great church, University Park Baptist Church, Reverend Dr. Claude Alexander. And, when people were being called to ministry, he was licensing folks to preach. And I remember a very, very dear friend of mine telling me that her father wasn't coming to her initial sermon because she was a woman. And I said, your dad? Because in my mind, I'm like, your father is not coming to your sermon? And she was like, no, because he didn't believe in women preachers. And I was an adult, at that point, and I was really shocked because the church, the small little rural church on River Road, Johns Island, Wesley United Methodist Church, where I grew up, there was a woman associate minister. So I had seen a woman in the pulpit. She was the associate. She wasn't the pastor, but she was still an associate. She was still a minister and part of our ministry at our church. So I was shocked when I actually heard that and did not realize what was really happening in the world because it wasn't happening in front of me. But as I continued from there, of course, I recognized this is a major issue, and that really people really feel that women cannot lead them in ministry. And it's a very real thing. I'm grateful that I didn't have that experience growing up, but my heart breaks for the people who did not have that. And even in seminary, I heard the horror stories, and I still hear the horror stories. I remember when I came back home, and I hadn't joined the church yet, but I visited, and I went up and I was considering membership, and I gave the person my name, and I said, I'm Reverend DeMett Jenkins. And the person said, when he called my name, he said, Minister DeMett Jenkins. And for me, if a man had said, my name is Reverend so-and-so, you would not have diminished him to minister. And so sometimes people do it knowingly, and sometimes because the culture has said that that's what it is, he didn't even say Reverend, he said minister. And so, I thought, why did he, reduce me to minister? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I didn't say minister, I said Reverend. And so I think there's still a lot of learning for people to understand that women have a role in ministry, and that God calls us all to lead and to provide care. So it doesn't, gender doesn't matter, but there are some people who are really still stuck on that. My friend's father died still believing that women didn't have a place in ministry.
Did that ever affect you in your own work? Was there ever any element of self-doubt? I think, like you said, growing up, having that example, I'm sure
Right.
that had an influence.
Yeah, like I had a
To
right,
see that.
to
So
be here.
did you ever experience that personally, or more so did you see other women struggle with that?
I can't say that it. I will say I have had some experiences here and there where the men who I may have been supervising or managing in a ministerial role really did not want to take my leadership. And I can recall a time where they actually had a meeting on for themselves and came to church doing something that they were already told they should not have done. But it was sort of their way of standing, we're not listening to you. And so my immediate supervisor was a woman who I told, and she in fact told the pastor, and the pastor had to reprimand them. So it was, but it changed the dynamics after that. And I got to a point where I didn't even want to, kind of supervise and manage them, because they were going to be intentionally defiant, simply because. So, and the only reason why they listened a little more to my immediate supervisor, because the pastor loved her and he counted on her. And so if he said it, then they would do it. But yeah, it was a little complicated.
What would be your guidance to, I would say, especially a young woman who may be considering a leadership role in ministry?
I think for anybody, male or female, you need a mentor. Yeah. Two, you should always think about, I think our pastors get really, really eager, especially when they're young. They want to be everything for their house of faith, and, find themselves all over the place. I'm going to be available to you, and you. And that you have to think about what I would tell. I was adjunct professor at Emory Candler School of Theology, so first year seminary students, that if you're going into the pastorate, you need to think about what your package looks like. And you need to take off a Sunday every quarter. That would be my recommendation, because that might work right now, that you're here every Sunday, you're available, but at some point your body is going to say, okay, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. but I've already set the precedence that I'm here and I can be here and I can, come visit you. Like, you need to take that Sunday off, one, to rest, to give yourself an extra day. And then secondly, if you have a family, normally if you're traveling out of town, you have to come back on Saturday, an early Saturday, because you got to prepare for Sunday. At least this gives your family another night that you can stay over someplace. Or even if you're at home, that you don't have to worry about coming in. So that you're caring for yourself even before you know you need to care for yourself. You'll be grateful that you've added this into your package. So I think having a mentor, really engaging someone, and not just a friend, because sometimes it's very hard for friends to tell friends the truth, right? Because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But to get someone who you don't have that kind of tie and relationship with, but you have a connection and a trusting relationship, so that they can tell you what they see you're doing or not doing, and you can kind of face that. But to not walk in this journey alone, and that some minds are not going to change. There are people who have beliefs, whether that's about women, whether that's about politics, whether about race, gender, sexuality. There are some people who are just not going to change. And so how are you going to manage that if you are the pastor there or in a ministerial leadership role? So just have somebody to walk alongside with you so you don't feel like you're walking alone.
Who are your mentors when you were starting out?
So definitely my mother. That's where my call to ministry really came. There are people who you might hear and say, they woke up 3 o'clock in the morning and the sky was parted. And I don't knock that. I mean, that's some people's experience. But my mother and my grandparents were definitely models. My mom never passed a stranger on the street. So if their car was broken down, or if she saw people walking, she was going to pull her car over and find out what the problem was. If they needed a ride, she brought them to our car. If they needed to just sit while they were waiting for a ride, then we sat there and waited till their ride came. Or she took them to our house so that they could make a phone call. And then while they were there, she put out her best china and fed them, even if it was just snacks. But she never let people be on the side of the road stranded. When people of different traditions came to the door, she welcomed them into our home. So I just saw a woman who cared about people. It didn't matter if they were different from her or not. She didn't treat them any different. She always was welcoming. And of course, my grandparents, who cared about every single person, not just about voting rights, but cared about their equality, their equal rights. If somebody didn't have food, my grandmother was packing up things to send down the road for somebody else because she knew their situation or their circumstances. So, ministry is about caring for people. It's about being thoughtful, about recognizing what the needs are, and making sure that you can't do everything, but connecting the people who can be supportive and helpful. So I'm just grateful that I was able to see people care about other folks, because it softened me and allowed me to be compassionate and thoughtful. It's one of those things I've always done. When these shootings started happening, I guess about 10 years ago, I think it was at Virginia Tech, might have been one of the first ones. I often think about, of course, the victims, and our hearts naturally go to those persons. But I also think about the perpetrators' families and kind of what they're going through. And so I would always try to find an address or, to send a card to them to say, God is with you. And there are people in this community who are thinking and praying for you as well. And so I never try to forget those people. And I still do that to this very day. I'm very intentional about, okay, how can I figure out how to get this card or something to those families as well, because they're hurting too.
Have you ever received a response?
No, I have not. I send them out to first responders, even if the fire department, the police department, whomever, and then definitely to both families. And I know that the victims' families, they're getting probably bags full of stuff, so it's very hard for them to send a thank you card out. But maybe there are others who think like me too, who are making sure that that perpetrator's family is remembered and thought about, and letting them know that there are people who love you and are praying for you as well, because we know that this is a very difficult time for you. So I have not gotten responses back. Yeah. Don't expect to. I pray that it gets landed to them and that they receive it.
I know we talked a little bit at the beginning of this conversation just about this time and your role with the museum and still trying to connect with people. Maybe looking beyond this time we're in now and maybe to the point of when the museum opens, right? We're looking at early 2022.
Mm-hmm.
What are you most excited about in your role? What is that thing that you're just ready to do?
Yes, I definitely want to see our faith communities do a couple of things. One of the things in my role, I work closely with the director for the Center for Family Research, and so we want our faith communities to know that if there are any parishioners or community people in your area that have their family Bibles where their loved ones or their ancestors have put, important dates and marriages, deaths, births, things of that nature. If you have a Bible, that we want to scan that Bible to our digital library, and then we'll give you an acid-free box to maintain and preserve that Bible. But that applies to pictures, marriage license, funeral obituaries, any of those things that have names and dates, because that's a part of research. When people come in to do their research, we have names and places. And so I want to see more of that. I want to see a lot of those folks, showing us their Bibles and the obituaries, and then wanting to come to the museum. We have a little studio to host events there, whether that be a Bible study, whether that be some spiritual event or program, that we have the space to do that, and that they're already saying, yes, we're going to sign up for something next month. We want to do this particular activity. That's what I want to see. I want to see our faith communities be members of this museum, so that they know that they are a part of creating history and helping us to tell these untold stories. Because a lot of our communities, people are not in history books, but they've done amazing things within their communities. We want to know those names. We want to know who those people are. One, so that we can honor and celebrate them for the work that they've done. And then we will have a digital, South Carolina will have a digital mapping table. So when a visitor comes from California and they put their finger on, 96 South Carolina, what populates are special things that have occurred in that town, special people. So I want to see a ton of that. I want people to get to know the folks in this area and around the world, and just use our museum for so many events and activities. That's my vision.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting that you have just this great story just within your family too, and like we talked about before, not just remembering Esau Jenkins'
yes.
name, but Janie B. Jenkins' name.
Yes.
And I wonder, is there anything in particular, a particular lesson or just way of living that you learned from her in particular? I know you just talked about your mother for a little bit, but what's a lesson you think of that you connect with your grandmother?
So my niece, who was 13 years younger than me, and when she was 18, she had gotten pregnant. And she, was scared, didn't tell anybody until the day she was having the baby. She didn't show much at all, so we didn't know she was pregnant. And she was like my child, I loved her. I was helping to raise her. And when I heard that, I I think I was disappointed that, she had had a baby young and I didn't know. And then I was disappointed in myself. I thought, what did I do wrong for her to have gotten pregnant? And so I remember she and I just kind of struggled with, how to be in relationship at this point in time. And so I wasn't talking to her much, but it was bothering me. And I remember I called my grandmother and I was just like, I'm just having a hard time. I'm not really talking to her. And, my grandmother said to me, she said, you have been there for those children since they were born. It was my niece and 2 nephews. You've been a good aunt to them. You've helped raise them. You provided for them. And she said, but if any time this child needs you, it is right now. You were there all before, and that was great. They were growing up and you were a part of their lives. But this is the time she really needs you, because she doesn't know what she's doing. She's a new mother, and she does not need to feel alone or be alone. And I mean, that it may not sound profound, but for me, her saying that to me, my whole world changed. And it felt like my burdens just went away. Like, if you thought you needed to be there before, you really need to be there now. She needs you now, even more so. And it was just something just that simple that she said to me that awakened me. And from that moment, I called and I apologized, but we had a very different, loving relationship. And it was just things like that she would always say, without thinking about it. I just picked up the phone. I don't know what she was doing on her end, but she always imparted things to you that made you think, that made you be reflective and to think about your actions. And, she just had a entrepreneur spirit. She knew how to manage businesses and multi-businesses at one time. So if I had to say I learned things from her, she just was a good manager. She was a kind person. As I said earlier, I never saw her angry or upset. And so how do you live life and not display frustration? Life is frustrating sometimes. When she raised, she had 13 kids and then she had all of us grandkids and all these businesses and a husband to maintain. So she just was remarkable, and I admire her. I would want to be like her in so many ways, and I hope that anything that she imparted in me, that she's proud of, how I represent myself, and my cousins. I think we all always talk about how proud we are of them and how proud we want them to be of us. So I pray that I'm making her smile as a warrior woman.
I'm so glad that we could talk about her today and talk about you and your experiences, and just thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me.